Draining the San Francisco Bay reveals Alcatraz as a pinnacle of bedrock emerging from the seafloor. It's surrounded by mountain peaks. All of them are ancient survivors from an age of earthquakes. Tom Parsons is a geophysicist with the United States Geological Survey. He's studied this area for decades.
So we're standing at the Golden Gate, and we're standing on mountains that were formed 100 million years ago. Yeah, we're sandwiched right between the San Andreas and the parallel Hayward Fault, both of which are helping to accommodate plate motion here between the Pacific and North American plates.
San Francisco sits right on the edge of the North American plate. As the Pacific plate grinds north past it, stress builds up along the major fault lines in the area. The Hayward Fault, and most notably, the San Andreas.
This region is very volatile. It produces large earthquakes. We've seen them in 1906, 1868. Both were devastating earthquakes in San Francisco.
The nightmarish effects of the 1906 earthquake, 7.9 on the Richter scale, are a reminder of how the area's violent geology threatens the existence of a great city. Over 100 million years ago, the landscape here was entirely different. There was a third plate between the two larger ones called the Farallon.
The Farallon plate used to sit between the Pacific and North American plate. It was shoved underneath the North American plate over all that time.
The movement of the Farallon plate was the catalyst that created San Francisco Bay and Alcatraz as it ground under the North American plate. This process is called subduction. As the Farallon plate disappeared, fragments of the Earth's crust were forced upwards, creating a valley and mountains.
The Alcatraz was part of the Coast Range belt that was uplifted by the subduction of the Farallon plate.
The Bay Area was then a long forested valley with a number of rocky mountains. One of these mountains was Alcatraz. 10,000 years ago, as the last ice age came to an end, the area was deluged by billions of gallons of meltwater. This created what we call San Francisco Bay. Alcatraz became an island. This 1853 photograph shows the tip of the drowned mountain as a featureless rock in the middle of the bay. Alcatraz may look tranquil and isolated, but it's surrounded by powerful natural forces. What earned the island its deadly reputation? And what may have happened during attempted escapes? Over 3 decades, there were 14 daring escape attempts from the island. The story of one of these is legendary.
Probably the most famous escape attempt would be the 1962 breakout.
Frank Lee Morris and brothers Charles and John Anglin devised an audacious bid for freedom.
The escape attempt was incredibly ingenious. It involved stealing an immense amount of material, dozens of rubber raincoats, glue, electric motors to turn into drills. The guys even made a periscope. They made a flashlight.
Now they had to use these homemade tools to breach the prison walls.
Right 'em. We're in one of the Anglin brothers' cells, and they were ingenious to actually create a portal at the back of their cell, and they fashioned a drill made out of a vacuum cleaner engine, put a diamond bit on the end of this thing, and then poked holes through the concrete to loosen up the concrete around the air vent. Dummy heads were made out of concrete material, human hair glued onto the heads, and the faces painted on these heads. And at night, with the lights down, it looked like they were sleeping in their cells. So in the cell house, the lights go out at 9:30. That's basically when they make their break. Once the lights are out, the heads are in place, they go up to the rooftop, and they've got from 9:30 to 6:30 the next morning to make it to the mainland.
With over 50 rubber raincoats glued together, Alcatraz escapees Frank Lee Morris and the Anglin brothers made a makeshift raft and life vests. It was their lifeline to freedom. They carried everything to the roof and dragged it down to the water's edge.
So this is the actual spot where they entered the water. Frank Lee Morris and the Anglin brothers came down this hillside. They dragged their raft, inflated it at the seawall here, jumped in, and took off into the night. They searched the waters looking for these three men, and the raft or the men were never found.
The official FBI documents state the three men and their raft were most likely swept out to sea. Their bodies were never recovered. But is this what really happened? Were they lost at sea? Or could they have made it to the mainland? To understand the fate of the three escapees on their raft, scientists are studying the geology of the bay itself. Can the seabed offer an answer? First, Patrick Barnard from the United States Geological Survey explores the underwater landscape at the mouth of San Francisco Bay. He's hoping analysis of the seabed will explain the powerful currents that surge around Alcatraz, making escape attempts so dangerous.
Today we're going to be mapping from the Golden Gate Bridge west toward the outer coast.
The investigation begins under the most iconic location in San Francisco Bay. Draining the water from under the Golden Gate Bridge reveals a huge gorge. It's far deeper than the rest of the bay, large enough to hide a 30-story building. But what happens to the seabed when the multi-beam vessel heads west to the open ocean? As the boat moves farther from the bridge, the water grows much shallower. The sonar readings suggest a dramatic transformation in the seascape below.
The bottom is changing. We're seeing a lot more sediment on the seafloor now.
Draining the water reveals an incredible sight.
We're starting to see some very large sand waves here that are emerging from the depths of the Golden Gate Strait.
These formations on the seabed are huge.
So the largest sand waves are about 200 meters long, 6 meters high. The biggest ones 10 meters high, or about 3 stories.
And they're sitting just yards away from the harbor entrance.
They look like probably what the Sahara would look like if you were walking through it.
These giant sand waves are caused by the huge tidal rush through the Golden Gate Strait. The fast-moving water picks up sand and then dumps it as it slows down.
You have all this sand and gravel being carried along and forced through this narrow opening, and then as the opening widens further and further, all this material gets deposited in these bed forms.
The drained landscape shows how the geology of the seabed shapes the powerful tidal currents in San Francisco Bay. First, the deep gorge funnels the water into a jet stream. Moving west, beyond the bridge, we follow the seabed as it rises from over 300 feet deep to just 130 feet. The drain shows how the racing current dumps thousands of tons of sand, creating these giant sand waves up to 30 feet high. But what does this underwater landscape have to do with escaping from Alcatraz? These racing tides are what the inmates had to contend with when fleeing the rock. Is it possible that Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers got caught in these wicked currents? The records from the 1962 FBI investigation show the tide charts on June 11th. From 9 p.m. to 3 a.m., there was a strong outgoing tide, which peaked at exactly 11:46 p.m. So when did the three escapees hit the water in their homemade raft?
From the moment lights out happened, which I think was 9:30. As soon as they could have, they would have gotten out of their cells. Give it an hour, hour and a half to have gotten everything that they needed to through that vent on the roof, cross the cell house, down the other side, hit the water. I think that they started paddling as soon as they got to the water, let's say 11 o'clock.
The 3 convicts would have been in the water at peak tidal flow during an ebbing, outgoing tide. What were their chances if their flimsy raft made of raincoats broke up, leaving them to swim in the powerful currents?
If you tried to escape off the north end of the island, especially during ebbing tide, like they did in 1962, where the currents are extremely strong and moving straight out to sea, it would be very difficult to swim out of that current. Within an hour and a half, you could have been on the open coast.
So Morris and the Anglin brothers had to struggle with the fastest and deadliest current flow in the bay. What happened to them is one of the great Alcatraz mysteries.